make a good impression on the people. Smiles, everyone. Let's get it together. Is that the best you can do, Melman?
Oh, I'm not smiling, it's gas.
Okay, well, great. Let's make gas look good. Wow. It's not people. It's animals.
California animals. Dude.
This is like a puppy party.
I like to move it, move it. I like to move it, move it. You like to move it. I like to move it, move it. I like to move it, move it. I like to move it, move it. You like to move it. I like to move it, move it. You like to move it, move it. She like to move it, move it. He like to move it.
Welcome to the Objective Secure podcast. My name's Mike.
Hi, I'm Emma.
This is episode 60. I like to move it. Look, that's a classic for the intro. I really like that clip. So we're going to be talking about terrain for 40k tournaments today. Specifically what we saw happen at the Las Vegas Open recently in regards to the top 100 tables. And talking about some of the changes to the major tournaments around the world and how they're handling terrain. There's a lot of interesting stuff that's happened. We've got some screenshots from LVO from the Twitch streams that we'll share in the show notes as well, so you can go and check out what we're talking about in the main topic. So, and what it means for OBSEC events as well, what we're talking about for the future and how we're going to try and adapt to some of the competitive events that we run compared to some of the hobby events.
I guess how we're adapting to community demands, really.
Yeah. So, before we do that, we're going to talk some news and current events and so on. I've got a few bits and pieces to cover today.
Oh, good, because I've got nothing.
Okay. Well, if you're listening to this, you'll no doubt realise we're a week late.
Yes.
It's the first time in 60 episodes, or 50 episodes, that it's been late. Just due to a combination of errors, it's late.
Yep. Sorry about that.
Yeah, there's not much we can do about it.
But we're back on track. So this will go out Wednesday this week, unless you manage to get it out sooner, I guess.
Yep.
And then there'll be another one
a week
next
later.
week, which will get us straight back onto our regular fortnightly schedule.
Yeah. But it does mean we've got a whole bunch of news and stuff to cover. We'll start with the two major events that happened around the world over the Australia Day long weekend, the 24, 25, 26, or 25, 25, 26, 27 January. The first one we'll cover is the 40k ITC Australian Championship held at CanCon in Canberra.
Mm-hmm. Which is a massive event.
Yeah, it's the biggest... it's not the biggest 40k event. I think ARC still holds that record in terms of head count. But in terms of, this is 3 days, 8 games, 2,000 points. Like, this is, in terms of, compare ARC, I think is only 1,350. Whereas this goes the whole hog and then, smashes it out to 8 full games, which is pretty...
And over 3 days. It's a big commitment.
Now, they had 180 register, I believe. Mm-hmm. And looking at the... if you head to bestcoastpairings.com or via the Best Coast Pairings player app, you can actually... You can't look at the list because this wasn't a sponsored event.
Ah, shame.
But you can sort of see the results. They actually, looking at the numbers, they did have a few drop after a couple of games, right at the end of day one, for example. But it looks like they had a pretty decent finish rate. I guess somewhere in the 130s, 140s actually finished.
Does it say how many actually started?
180.
So 180 did start?
Yeah, there are 180 registered names here. There's one player who dropped, 3 players who dropped out at the end of game 1. And then there's a couple more in game 2 and so on.
Because I know sometimes you have registered players, but then something happens in the couple of days or the the morning of, and they can't actually get there. So I wasn't sure if the whole 180 started.
See, by the time we hit the 120s, we get basically everyone completing. But before, so 120 to 180, there's a whole bunch of players that only completed 4 games and still finished higher than others who finished 6 or 7.
Right.
So it's a bit hard to work out exactly. But the winner after 8 games of absolute brutality, undefeated, only player to go undefeated, was Chris Wright from Overwatch Gaming. He also won the Australian ITC Championships. So he'll be heading to LVO for 2021.
2021, yeah. Well, he wasn't going for 2020,
No, because it was the same weekend.
Yeah. So I'm going, again, surprise, surprise, I'm going to go off on a tangent here. What are your thoughts on people who don't finish an event, finish actually having a ranking higher than people who do finish an event?
Yeah, as a player and as an organiser, I have a lot of problems with players dropping.
I have a huge problem with people. I understand that people have to drop for various reasons.
Yeah.
So if there's, if you're unwell or if there's a family emergency that kind of thing, then I have no issue with that. Family comes first, then you leave. But regardless of the reason that you leave, I don't think you should be able to finish.
No,
I don't think you should get a ranking.
Yeah. That's
it. So you should get a DNF, and
that should be the end of it.
That should be the end of it.
Yeah.
Now, people who decide to quit because they can't win the event, that I have a problem with.
What's interesting, I was talking to someone about this while we were at Varsity Project in Morley for the Las Vegas Open Final, which we might as well move on to now. So before we do, congratulations again to Chris Wright for winning the ITC Australian Championship and for the CanCon.
Yeah, sorry about that. Didn't mean
40K
to
event.
Skip over your. So yeah, congratulations, Chris.
He did win it with Iron Hands Space Marines, and the second place was Iron Hands Space Marines, and the 5th place was Iron Hands Space Marines, and the 8th place was Iron Hands Space Marines, and the 9th place was Iron Hands Space Marines, and the 12th place... Oh, no, that was Iron Warriors, not Iron Hands. There's a lot of Iron
Okay, well,
Hands.
5 in the top 10.
Yeah, which we'll talk about with LVO now. So, LVO was run over the same weekend. Mm-hmm. We had Richard Siegler win it with Iron Hands Space Marines.
Yeah, did they have the same list or only the same...
No, so Brohammer, which is the team that Richard plays for, the entire team took the same list.
Okay.
I believe. I could be wrong, but that's my understanding is that they did. Which is interesting. It means that there were a few, 10th place was Brohammer and 4th place was Brohammer. So there were a couple of that same list lurking around in the top 10.
Yeah.
So they definitely prove that there's an issue with that particular build with the Iron Hands because they copied themselves and finished really well.
So there's a couple of things there.
To take nothing away from the player ability, because there are plenty of players who took similar lists in the lower part of the field who didn't finish anywhere near as well, because Richard's proven over the 3 or 4 events now that he's an exceptionally good player despite having played for a relatively short amount of time compared to a lot of other players. So take nothing away from him.
Or the other people.
Or the other players who took the same list.
And the other players who were part of that same, the Brohammer.
Now, LVO, according to Best Coast Pairings, had 758 start with sums actually in Best Coast Pairings. Now, from what I understand, they had over 1,000 register. So whether the 200 and something discrepancy didn't buy tickets or those, for whatever reason, they're not in this pool.
Whether they didn't buy tickets or just didn't turn up.
Yeah. They're not in Best Coast Pairings regardless. Now, I'm on the website at the moment. It's a bit hard to work out exactly, but when I worked it out on the app, my best guess was they had around 140 players drop by the time you start round 6.
So round 6 is
the end of day 2. End of day 2.
End of day 2. Yeah.
So they would have, those 140-ish drop, it wouldn't have mattered at the end of game 6 because only the top only the top 13 played round 7 and then only the top 8 played day 3. So they had an attrition rate of about, like I say, it's somewhere in the 140, 150 player range. It's hard to tell because there are players in here who, there's a guy here who finished 670 something with only 4 games, and yet there are guys below him who finished 6 games.
Yeah.
So again, it's very hard to work out exactly what's actually happened in regards to the accurate number of who dropped.
Yeah. Okay, so again, going off on a tangent.
So congratulations to Richard Siegler for the win.
Yes, well done.
We were at Varsity Project Morley because it was the Australia Day long weekend here in Australia. That Monday morning at 8 a.m. coincided with the start of Game 9 for the LVO Championships. So we partnered with Varsity Project in Morley to head out. They opened the bar for us at 8 a.m. They even extended the bar license so that they could serve a Monday morning beer. And it meant that a bunch of our players got to head out and watch it on the big screen. And when I say the big screen, I mean this is meters by meters. It was a huge wall screen. We had about 30 people, just over 30 people watching at one point there, streaming through the Waihama TV Twitch account. So that was great. We had a really good morning. It wasn't necessarily as an exciting a game as previous years that we've seen.
Yeah.
But it was a very cagey game and a very technical game, particularly in the later parts, sort of turn 4 onwards. They actually finished with over an hour to spare because it was such a... the first 3 turns were over fairly rapidly. Unlike previous years where we've seen, the end of the year I was there in 2017, I think they got to turn 4. So the fact that this game actually was through to completion with time to spare was a really good sign. Yeah, they had plenty of judges on side to do the chess clocks for the players. They had,
okay,
it was a very heavily monitored game, which was great. So I think the guys at Frontline Gaming really made sure that game was as managed and monitored as possible without intruding on the game itself. So they did a really good job. Yeah.
So what I was going to say before you then carried on with your thing about Varsity, when you guys went to LVO, which now was quite a while ago, but still, there seemed to be a higher exhaustion level. So, at the end of day 2, everyone was exhausted.
Yeah.
Now, I get that playing 6 games over 2 days with 2,000 points in a room where you've got to walk 400 metres to get between tables is difficult. But I'm wondering, do you think that there's any more concentration? Like, why do you think that people are more exhausted? Do you think that it's kind of a psychological thing where, I'm tired, so I'm just not going to turn up. I'm not going to, do you think that it's part of the nature in those kinds of events that people they take it a bit harder, or that it's a valid excuse to drop out because I'm tired, and so people pick up on that and sort of it becomes contagious?
I don't know. I definitely think there's a percentage of players who, as soon as they can't win, they just pull the pin and go, "No, I'm done."
Yeah.
Which, like I said earlier, I was talking to someone at Varsity around that, and he was saying that in all the conversations he's had, that really seems to be an American thing, whereas a lot of the UK and the European players and the Australians see that as bad sportsmanship, where you're not actually finishing the event and showing respect to the organisers and the other players who've made the effort. Whereas with the American community, it's, well, I can't win, so...
I only came here to win. If I can't win, I'm going home.
Yeah, I'm out. And you're in Vegas, so it's a bit easy to turn around and go, well, I've got other stuff I could do. Although that doesn't take into account the $130, $140, $150 or more dollars you've spent on the tournament itself, because you have to buy the event pass plus the tournament ticket.
And your accommodation and how much it costs you to travel
But you're there in Vegas anyway. I'm sure you can find stuff to do in Vegas.
Yeah.
So... yeah, it's interesting that it seems to be a mindset thing for the...
And that's what I'm wondering about, that exhaustion. Is the exhaustion a mindset thing?
I honestly think that for Americans, they don't even use that as an excuse. They just go, I can't win it anymore, I'm done. I think that's the way it comes across to me.
But yet, when it came to the third day, so you'd bought a ticket for the third day.
For the RTTs.
For the RTT.
Yep.
How many people had dropped out and didn't bother turning up for the RTT?
Oh, yeah, there were a lot that didn't turn up for day 3's RTTs.
And, and I guess what I heard often was that people were too tired.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering why that is, because we don't experience that here.
Well, we don't have any 3-day tournaments here.
No, we don't. And maybe we just have more tightwads here, that if I've paid for it, I'm boom and going. I just find it interesting that people pay for a tournament and yet more than 50% didn't turn up for it.
Well, it wasn't 50%.
I thought you'd actually said that it was.
From 1,000 down to
No, I'm talking about the RTTs on the third day.
Oh, okay. Yeah, look, the RTTs on the third day were really weird because the pools that we had were meant to be pools of 8. Our pool only had 6, and there were plenty of pools that only had 6 players in them. And we had buys and all sorts of stuff happening. It was really weird. So, I don't know. I mean, I can't really be bothered going through all the RTT pools.
I'm not asking
best
you
guess
to.
pairings,
I'm
but
just saying that there's like a big percentage of people
look, I mean,
dropped out.
At the end of day 3, at the end of day 2, you might just go, I like the RTT pools are meant to be your first points that you can score for the next season for ITC. And you might just turn around and go, you know what? I've had 2 days of play. I'm mentally exhausted. The weekend we were there, the Super Bowl was happening as well, which obviously played a factor in people deciding to drop out.
That's true. I do forget those sports.
But, I mean, there were Aussies there who we'd gone with that decided not to play the RTT so they could go and watch the Super Bowl in one of the Vegas pubs or bars or whatever you want to call them. So, yeah, I don't know. The year we were there might have been a bit of a weird one because of the weekend that it was. The biggest thing for people dropping, particularly really experienced players, and there were a few big names who didn't make the cut to the top 8 who we assumed would have. And as soon as they lost a game, from what it looks like, I have no basis in what actually happened, what transpired, but they lost a game and then they dropped.
Purely assumption.
Yep. For whatever reason. Hopefully those reasons were, something's happened and I can't,
I need to go now.
I can't compete. Unfortunately, as an organiser, what those experienced and, generally speaking, highly placing players dropping in the early parts of the event in particular has a significant knock-on impact to the later part of the event because, you have a player who maybe drops from game 2 or game 3 and then just bails at the end of day 1 or halfway through day 1. They could actually finish the event on 5-1 at the end of day 2. And while they're not going to make the top cut, they potentially impact, particularly in rounds 5 and 6,
who's playing
who,
yes,
which naturally will change the outcomes for those top 12 to play round 7 and in turn who makes the top 8. So it's a really frustrating one as an organiser and a player because it artificially changes, who, like I say, who ends up where. Now, if you look at rank 14 at LVO was 5 wins and a draw. And then rank 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, they're all 5-1.
Yeah.
So at that point, the highest you finish on 5-1 is 15th. But you could still impact who finished 13th and 12th, which means that changes who gets into the top 8.
Now, the flip side of the argument to this is that if I only went to win and I'm not going to win, why should I go just because it's going to impact
other people?
Yeah. I'm not here. I've paid my money.
Yeah, I'm here for me.
I'm here for me, so other people can kind of cocoa. So I'm aware that that's a thing.
Yeah, look, I mean...
it's just not what we're used to.
No, and like I say, there's plenty of players like Alex Harrison and Nick Rose who did drop a game and finished admittedly they were dropping them in round 6, so they were still in with a shot. Yeah. But Australia had a couple of players go over. Matt Morrisoli from Art of War Australia, he finished 66th. He dropped game 4. Still ended up on 5 out of 6 wins, finished 66th. And Simon
G.
Yeah, I can never say his surname, from Godhammer Gaming, he dropped round 5 and still finished 23rd. 24th.
Well done, Simon.
So really awesome to see both those players do really, really well. Go 5-1 at LVO out of a field of 750 players to finish in the top 70 is, top 10% finish is a really good finish, despite 66 feels like a big number.
Yeah, but out of 1,000.
Yeah, but that's it. So they both did really well. But then you have other well-known players who didn't finish. And that just... I find it disappointing and frustrating as a player because, it'd
be interesting. I know that the chance of having an open and honest discussion on air probably wouldn't happen, but it'd be interesting to have a private discussion to find out how American TOs do actually feel about that.
Mm.
Whether or not is the attitude from TOs different? Do they find it frustrating and, that kind of thing?
Well, that's it. If their mindset is, I don't care,
yeah.
then that obviously changes the...
And American players as well.
Yeah. It's certainly... We don't experience anywhere near that sort of drop rate.
No.
Even for our biggest events, when you get like 80, 90 players, we might have half a dozen not turn up.
It's often not half a dozen.
No. And if they start the event, the only ones who don't finish the event are the ones who, have something happen that they bail. They don't, I don't know. It feels really foreign to me.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
For our last event, we had someone who turned up and went, I'm just wondering if it would be okay. My relative's in hospital and I'm the only relative that they've got here. Would it be all right if I went to go and see them today rather than playing this event? Yeah.
Yeah, you can go.
You don't have to ask that. That's very different to...
I can't win.
I can't win,
Yeah.
so I'm going to go drown my sorrows in the pub or do something else.
So if you are an American listener or anywhere else outside of Australia for that matter, send us a message and let us know what you think about players dropping from a major event. Are you a TO? How does that impact your thought process on some of those well-known players who traditionally do very well dropping out in the early parts of the event? And does that affect the final outcomes? Because I can only see it from what we see, and that would, like I've said, it would change the outcome, potentially.
Okay, I hear what you're saying, that it would change the outcome, and I know that you were wrapping that up. But does it change the outcome?
Yes.
Okay, yes, I know it does. I know it does. But is it different to if that player hadn't actually gone at all? And so can you say it's changing the outcome? Because if they hadn't played any rounds, then they...
But, okay, so if you play your first 2 games and win, play your third, lose and drop, you have already changed the event. Particularly if the event's seeded. So, if they get to round 4 undefeated, play round 5, lose and drop, that has an even more, like the later they drop, the worse it gets. Because if you drop game 5, you lose.
Yeah.
Game 5 and then walk out and you don't play game 6, then you're at the top end of the pool at that point, and that does change what's going to happen. So...
Did they use Swiss pairing?
It looks like it was Swiss, yeah. I can't be sure because, we don't see the ins and outs of how it was matched. But it does look like Swiss, yeah.
All
anyway,
right.
moving on.
Else. Yeah.
LVO,
Quick, move on before I think of another tangent.
LVO also gave us a bunch of previews from Games Workshop.
Oh, yeah.
So we had the new Adeptus Mechanicus, complete with their little spoof video again, where in binaric code and all the rest of it, where they gave us the new previews for the flying infantry and the cavalry. I love the fact that one of the horse variants has a flamer for a head. Who doesn't want a horse with a flamer for a head? Interesting little Easter egg there as well. If at the end of the video, they've got a binaric, O's and 1s block, where they would normally have the, coming soon 2020 or whatever date they would normally put on there. If you take that binaric code and put it into a converter, it actually gives you a date of release. So if you feel like going and finding the binaric code converter in Google, you can actually take those O's and 1s and actually look and see when it's coming out, which is April.
I was going to say, I'm sure someone's already done that.
Yeah. I had someone send it to me. So I thought that was a really cool little Easter egg that they put in there to really dig into the into the theme of the army. So we got I want to say Cerberus, which is Serberys, Cerberus, but
so not Spot.
But not Spot. The Sulphur Hounds and the Raiders, respectively. So one literally has a flamer for a head, which just is awesome. And the other is more like a skirmish unit. Robotic cavalry, basically. There's a few people grumbling about the fact that the Scutari have now got cavalry and they took away the Rough Riders for the Astra Militarum, but them's the breaks. We also got the Taraxi, which are basically flying Sicarian infantry. So big flamers, and they've got the same sort of wings of the new Archaeocopter as well. So they're sort of this weird sort of Da Vinci style framework with like the pseudo leather batwing type look, which they look really cool. I really like them. They also gave us a preview for Psychic Awakening Engine War, which is book 7, 8, I forget now, which is Knights, Chaos Knights, the AdMech, and I'm assuming it'll be demons. It's some sort of chaos. It's got the chaos symbol there. They gave us a quick preview of Makari, who I really love. It's a Gretchen model from 2nd edition. Hasn't been around since 2nd. Who used to be Ghazghul Thracker's standard bearer. And he was the luckiest grot alive. Like, he'd have las cannons deflect off medals that he had on his pouch, and grenades had landed his feet and not go off, and like he'd duck at just the right moment to pick up something shiny on the ground, then a missile would whiz over where his head was, and they ditched him in 3rd edition. And now they've given us a preview of him coming back for 8th edition. And then in the background, they've gone, and he's also got his sidekick. And they've given us these snippets of the new Ghazghul model, which is coming with Psychic Awakening Saga of the Beast. And that's going to be a big model. He was quite titchy when he first came out in Rogue Trader. He was the size of a Space Marine. And then in 3rd or 4th edition, they did a new version. I think it was 3rd. In Mega Armor, he was on a 40mm base, and he was significantly bigger. And 4 editions later, he's titchy again.
Oh.
And now we're going.
It doesn't happen very often.
And now, no. Now we've hit 8th edition. He feels titchy, and now we're going to get the 8th edition model, which is going to scale it up again.
Oh, right, okay.
And there's been some amalgamation shots where they've pieced it together from the video.
Yeah.
There's a skull on the base in front of one of his feet that looks like a human-sized skull. This is going to be Dreadnought-sized. He's going to be a big model. So hopefully they give him some new rules and make him really cool. Very excited for that. But more importantly, as far as I'm concerned, Age of Sigmar release.
How is this more importantly as far as you're concerned?
Because these are the new elves, the Lumineth Realm Lords, which
I saw that
so good.
30 seconds after it was announced, the messages started going, hey, Emma, so how long till Mike starts playing AOS? I give it a week.
So we saw the previous, the Realm Lords. They've only given us a couple of units, so I'm still very cautiously optimistic of these at the moment. Like, they've given us the new Spearmen, the new Dawn Riders, which are sort of the updated Silver Helms from Warhammer Fantasy, which again look really cool. They gave us the new Teclis model, which I still want Tyrion. Like, the Teclis model with the big sort of Sphinx Griffin monster, I'm kind of ambivalent towards. Like, it feels like they went, we want this big flying god wizard floating in the air, but to get him floating in the air, we have to attach him to something big. So here's a giant monster. And I'm hoping that the stories and the stuff that sort of go with the battle tome will explain the hows and whys, but it's the spirit of Heish, which is with Teclis.
Yeah.
But more than anything else, the most important model that they've released, as far as I'm concerned, is the Light of Eltharion, which is a suit of armor with no one in it. It's a ghost suit of armor. And they've been really clever with the design in terms of how these bits of armor sort of float together, where they're attached with sashes and capes. And they've left it hollow, though, so it feels like it's a ghost, which is really clever. I imagine the CAD work to get it to look just right would have been really interesting to do. It's an amazing sculpt. The helmet is really interesting. It's very reminiscent of the armor, the dragon armor of Anarion, which is what Tyrion wore before the end times. And a lot of the markings and iconography on it don't lend itself to being Eltharion, but Eltharion is what it's called. It says the Light of Eltharion sees one of the most legendary heroes of this race return. So it could very well be Eltharion, and that's certainly what's implied. But I guess we'll wait for the book to find out. We also got a Seraphon battle tome with a new piece of terrain coming. And Underworld sort of ties into that, where we got Wormspat, which is the new Nurgle-themed warband. And then we got Blackstone Fortress as well. We got another expansion for that, which is the Zotes. Now, for those of you playing along at home that aren't old enough to remember what Zotes are, and I suspect anyone under the age of about 35 probably doesn't. Zotes were around in Rogue Trader, and they were basically like a centaur. So they were 4 legs, but a humanoid sort of body on top, but they were like lizards. So they had almost elephant-style legs, but they were reptilian. And they used to be the heralds of the Tyranids. What they are now, who knows? But the model is big and looks awesome, so I'm very keen to see, because the Blackstone Fortress rules, when they release for the game, also release with 40k rules, which means that this is coming back to 40k in some way, shape, or form.
Oh, awesome!
So we've also got the new Forge World rules, basically saying that the indexes for Forge World will be going the way of the Dodo. They're now on last chance to buy. And the Forge World rules are being moved in-house to Games Workshop. So we're going to be getting new Forge World rules for 40k and Age of Sigmar, which is really good. It's an opportunity for them to fix some of the issues. Those books are, well, they were released week of 8th edition, so we're nearly 3 years ago now. Yeah. And the game has moved on fairly significantly in that time. So it's going to be good to see them adapt and fix some of the issues, which were highlighted at LVO, particularly around things like the Leviathan Dreadnought for the Space Marines, where there's a combination that makes them virtually unkillable. We also got some more Horus Heresy release. Book 9's been announced. The Warhammer Heroes for 2020 have been announced.
Oh, I haven't seen them.
It's a shorter list than the last 2 years.
How many?
Like 11? 3, 6, 9... Yeah, 11.
Any Aussies?
None of the names jump out at me as anyone I would know. That doesn't necessarily mean there are no Aussies.
Because it doesn't tell you there.
Because it doesn't tell you where they're from. Yeah. Thomas, Simon, Anthony, Carl, Jason, Alex, Brittany, Giovanni, David, Micah, and John. I'm not going to even try the surnames for some of them, so we'll just go with the first names because I can pronounce them all. And the last part from LVO was we got the teaser trailer for Angels of Death, which is the new CG cartoon movie 40k project that they're working on. It's Space Marines, and it's digital, whatever, whether you want to call it a comic or a cartoon or a movie, I don't know. But it looks cool. So LVO gave us a lot of interest. That weekend was a very busy, full-on weekend. More recently, we've seen pre-orders for the Wrath of the Everchosen. We've seen pre-orders for some of the new Underworlds bits and pieces. There's the Rothgorn's Man-Trappers, which is the ogre character, which looks really cool. There's also some really interesting card mechanics in that. We've seen the Corpse Grinder Cult for Necromunda release with the Goliaths, which I'm already seeing parts of those kits. They're going to go straight into Genestealer Cult armies. We've had Warhammer Underworlds Online release in early access on Steam, if you want to go and play Underworlds Online.
Oh, which is interesting.
I don't know how it's being balanced or managed, but it's on early access at the moment. And then just last night, which is the last thing we'll wrap up the news with, we've had the announcements for the next Psychic Awakening, which is, and we've kind of seen parts of this for the Tau anyway, for the Greater Good release. So we're going to get the Tau Empire, Astra Militarum, and Auto Tempestus, so the Scions, and the Genestealer Cults. We already know we're getting a new model for Commander Shadow Sun, which looks pretty specky. It's got 4 arms, which is interesting to put it in with Genestealer Cult, because the Genestealer Cult worship the 4-armed Emperor. So I don't know how intentional that particular link is. The new Shadow Sun comes with an upgraded Mark 22 Stalker battlesuit and 2 new drones. So we're going to see the old version go to Legends, I assume, with this new updated version. And from the looks of the guns, you're going to want to use the new one anyway. It's also got 3 heads. So you get an unhelmeted head, a helmeted head, and then a half-helmeted head as an option. It's only got the top half of the helmet, so her jawline and cheeks are exposed for whatever reason. And the half-helmeted head also has her top knot, whereas the full-helmeted one doesn't. Okay,
so it's a half helmet with a hole in the top.
So. Yeah, I don't know, it's a bit weird. Again, it's another...
Heaven forbid you mess up your makeup or your hair. Gosh.
It's another model that's going to be on, from the looks of it, a 40mm, maybe even a 50mm base. It's a bit hard to tell from the shots. And she's jumping on a big piece of terrain again, which is no doubt going to cause more consternation from gamers about modelling for advantage when people inevitably take her off it. And we keep saying we need to do an episode about that, and maybe we have to for next week.
It's a really, really complex
It's a rabbit hole.
And I just... Now the kids are back at school, maybe I can actually think enough to be able to get a coherent thought process happening so that we could delve into that. But otherwise, I don't know, I just feel like my brain just goes in 18 different directions all at once. And it does that enough as it is.
No, that's true.
So, you know, I don't even know how you tackle modelling for advantage.
Well, we're going to try.
Are we?
Yep.
For next week?
Yep.
I think we should do it in 3 weeks.
We'll see. We've also got the Star Collecting box finally for the Gene Stealer Cult dropping to coincide with this book. We haven't had one for these guys, which I don't know why it's taken so long. It's 5 Acolytes, 10 Neophytes, an Icon Ward, and a Achilles Ridge Runner, which is a really interesting box because I assume they would have put a Goliath truck in instead of the Ridge Runner buggy.
I don't feel like Gene Stealer Cult is the type of army that you need a get started box for.
Oh, no, you do.
No, well, let me explain that. What I mean by that is that it's a really complex army. It doesn't feel like the kind of army that a new player starts with. And so that's why I always think a get started box is more for people who are newer.
Yeah.
Whereas people who have been playing a bit longer can read the codex and read the rules, or, not codex, so that they can then go, okay, well, I want 5 of these, 10 of these, that kind of thing, and put their own collection together. They don't need the helping hand of going, here's what we recommend you start with.
Well, the interesting thing, at least from a Gene Stealer Cult player's point of view, is it's a hit and a miss. The Ridge Runner got a big points drop in the latest chapter approved, so we are starting to see more of those tripping into army builds.
Yeah.
And hopefully hopefully the Greater Good Psychic Awakening book will give them some other stuff to do as well. But it's only 5 Acolytes, and really you want minimum squads of 10, but reality is 15 to 20. You get 10 Neophytes, which, while useful, like I've got 60 or 70 of the damn things, and they're not a popular choice for most players to begin with anyway. You get an Icon Ward, which I suspect most players will end up chopping its arms off and using the spare parts from the Acolyte sprues you get in this box to turn him into a sergeant style, or just another Acolyte, because that's what it is. Because after you've got maybe 2, I can't come up with a reason to ever run 3 Icon Wards. 1, yes. 2, maybe. If you're buying, say you buy 3 of this box, that gives you 15 Acolytes, which is 1 squad. It gives you 30 Neophytes, which between 1 and 2 squads. It gives you 3 Icon Wards, which you'll never use. You'll use 1 or maybe 2, like I say, and then you've got 1 squad of Ridge Runners. It's actually... And Gene Stealer Cult's one of the worst dollar for point ones anyway. But it just feels like it's only 17 models, and the 17 models will come to 200 points if you're lucky. And it'll be, in Australia at least, it'll be $160, would be my guess. 150, 160-ish bucks. So it's like $1 per point, basically, depending on how you arm them. Like if you hand those Acolytes all the heavy weapons, then you can up the points, but you're never going to do that.
And I know that's when we did sort of have a look at the Gene Stealer Cult a little bit more closely. We were looking at it being about $1 per point. Yeah.
It's one of the most expensive armies to collect, if not the most expensive. They are finally releasing the Kellamorph in a blister pack as well. He'll be a $40 kit, I assume. He was only available in the Skarn's Disciples. I think it was Skarn's Disciples for for Kill Team.
Yes.
So now he's finally coming out as a blister pack, which is nice for players. I think they missed the boat there, though, because a lot of players just built their own.
Yeah.
Which is a shame. And that we're finally also getting...
Yeah, but then there's also those players who are going to buy it anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then there's players who wouldn't have bought it regardless. So,
We've finally seen Adeptus Satanicus come out with a get started box as well. So they released they released
2 years after it came out.
It's over a year now, but they released that $500 Australian, the big giant God Engine, whatever it was called, box. They've now given us a smaller, more manageable box with 2 Reavers, 2 Warhounds, and 2 Cerastus Knights, which is interesting because none of these models came in the original box.
Yeah.
So the box should be cheaper because it doesn't have any of the warlords or any of the it doesn't. It's not full of models like the other one was. So that's a good thing. It'll actually make the game a bit more accessible. And it was Grandmaster Edition. That was what it was called.
I know that there was a lot of uproar when it came out because $500 was a lot to start a new gaming system. But we've just been talking about the fact that you're looking at $1 per point for Gene Stealer Cull. All of a sudden, Adeptus Titanicus doesn't look particularly expensive, does it?
Well, it's a bit misleading because if you go, I don't know what this box will be. I'm assuming in Australia it'll be that sort of 260, 280 range. It might even tip over into 300. But you've got 2 Reavers, 2 Warhounds, and 2 Knights.
Yep.
You're going to want more than that. And all of a sudden, if this is a $300 box and you use all of that, you're still going to drop another couple $100 at least.
I would say chances are you're going to get 2 of the boxes, or and then
or if you want
them
Warlords,
kind of
or they've finally given us a preview of the Nemesis Warbringer in this scale as well. Like you're going to drop $1,000 on this game before you're done. So, it's not that much cheaper than 40k when you actually get down to it.
But I guess when it came out, what I was hearing was that it was a lot more expensive
the buy-in
than
was
40k.
And I think this is why they've done this.
Well, like that's it. And I know that I'm often horrified at the amount of money worth of models that we have in our house and in our shed and in our garage and in the dungeon and every part of our life that you can imagine.
There's several $100 sat on the table around us.
Yeah, going up to 1,000 easily, just sitting on the desk. But I guess it just feels like it's more value for money than perhaps something like Lego, which is incredibly expensive, an hour to build and then sits on a shelf.
Yeah. We're also going to get more terrain for
We're not.
Titanicus.
Yeah.
So they're giving us all the 40k scale buildings shrunk. So we're even getting the little shipping containers scaled down to Titanicus scale, and the doors open and they've got interior detail and all this other stuff. So it's really cool looking, but I can't help but think that, again, it's too little too late when you've got places like OTP Terrain who've been producing terrain for this game for over a year now, and they're not alone in that.
No.
And while this terrain looks really cool, it feels like it's... Unless they see this box as a revival of the game in terms of interest in store, I feel like if you're going to play the game, you probably already bought into it.
One of the things that I wonder is how much of this is actually available in store.
Well, there is that. I don't know. And most of the stores only have so much space.
They do only have so much space, and the biggest seller is 40k and AOS.
Yeah.
But, they have... One of the things that I like about Games Workshop is that they have stores, so you can go in and you can try before you buy, but it seems to only be mainly those 2 game systems. There's a little bit of Kill Team, but that's about it, really.
Yeah, I mean, they certainly AOS and 40k take up 80% of the shelf space. You do get Kill Team Splash stuff turn up. You do get Blood Bowl Splash stuff turn up. You do get Titanicus turn up. Lord of the Rings still has a presence in a lot of the stores.
There's no Blood Bowl pitch set up.
No. Generally not, no.
You can't go in and get someone to show you how to play Blood Bowl. You can't go in and generally get someone to sit down and play a game of Underworlds with you.
I think Underworlds is probably more supported than a lot of these games. Because it's a core, like anything that's supported by Forge World as in a specialist game, and I'm talking Necromunda, Titanicus, Blood Bowl, where Games Workshop released the core box and then Forge World are supporting it.
Yeah.
Those games don't generally get a lot of shelf life in store. They get a splash release and then they disappear. And like you say, getting a game in store to be shown the game is hard. Whereas things like Kill Team Lord of the Rings and Underworlds, while they might not be as prevalent in store, they're at least Games Workshop product where you buy them from the Games Workshop web store. You can order them in store. And Underworld certainly has a following in a lot of the stores. Certainly here in WA, at least.
Yeah. I guess what I'm wondering is, would and it's obviously there's people who have got a lot of business sense that are making these decisions. But yeah, would the games be bigger if they did have more in-store support and in-store presence?
Yeah, it's.
But I'm guessing that they've put a lot of thought into not doing that.
I imagine. I mean, there's the equations you can run in terms of what each shelf space needs to return and how big a box is compared to the space it's allocated compared to how much it makes.
And how popular that particular box is. When you've got blisters that are, $15 blisters being turned over every hour, as opposed to a $300 box set of Titanicus, which is you might sell one a month. Yeah.
And that's the thing. Like, I've seen plenty of people.
I don't actually know if you can get a $15 blister pack.
22, I think, is the cheapest these days. Agatone from the Salamanders was a $70 release for one character. Now, he is a box. It's a small box.
Yeah.
And I've seen $70 for a single model. That's ridiculous. The counter I have to that is, how many are you actually buying?
Yeah.
You're buying one. He's a named character. You might buy two. Maybe if you paint the first one and you want to paint it again at a later date, or you want to pull parts of it for a conversion or something. But the average player is likely to buy a maximum of one, and that's if they're playing Salamanders. So when they put that on the shelf, and then 6 months later it goes to mail order only, it's because they can't keep it on the shelves. Like, the space it takes up for the volume of sales just isn't there. Yeah. And that's what I suspect a lot of these specialist games fall into, is it does well for a period of time and then they have to pull it because it's dead stock, essentially. It's costing them money. And that, you like or love Games, or hate Games Workshop.
Like or love.
there's a point where business the practicality of stock and business has to be taken into account, and what they're doing makes sense. Doesn't make them evil, it just makes them pragmatic.
Yeah, well, if they go bankrupt, then everything stops.
Yeah. Anyway, that was a fairly long start to this episode.
We've not actually got to the topic yet.
No, we're gonna break now, and then we're going
to a cup of tea.
We're going to go and talk terrain and the future of OBSEC terrain for 40k.
Awesome. It's going to be the quickest segment ever. I reckon we can do it in 10 minutes flat.
I wouldn't bank on that.
Me neither.
All right, back in a sec. So terrain is always a contentious issue for any war game.
That's one word for it.
And we should clarify right off the back, every war game has its own trials and tribulations when it comes to terrain. The closer you get to board game, the easier it gets. Things like X-Wing still have their little asteroid tokens and stuff which have impacts on the game.
That sounded very condescending. I know you didn't mean it that way, but it did sound that way.
What I mean is, I suppose X-Wing it skirts the line between a board game and a tabletop game, and so there are really clear defined rules on what the asteroids do, but you also get them in the core box, and they're...
Oh, look, out of all the game systems that we have run events for, X-Wing, Blood Bowl, and Underworlds are my favourites.
Yeah.
Love them. Absolutely love them.
And the War Machine community here, at least here in WA, have started moving towards neoprene flat terrain, and it's certainly something that we've seen happen at the World Team Championships for War Machine and for some other game systems where it's just flat printouts and neoprene mats with terrain drawn on them, which in War Machine's case makes it better for the game, but less visually appealing as far as I'm concerned.
What do the players have to say? Have you talked to them about it?
Because of the nature of the game, they like the look of terrain, but the practicalities of it win out because of the nature of the game. Although at Varsity, one of the guys had done a conversion, which is a very rare thing in War Machine. You don't see too many of them. And it was this particular character rides around on the back of a for lack of a better description, a pirate ship. And he said the model was so bad to build that he'd made green stuff tentacles of like a kraken coming out from under it, and basically used it to hide all the gaps in the ship's hull, and then put it on a modelled see-through clear resin base, like a water base.
Yeah.
And I said, would it have not been easier just to build the thing, like spend the extra effort to make it all fit and trim it and prep it? And he went, no, it was that bad. So there is still a lot of the hobby side of it for War Machine, but certainly the terrain seems to take it's definitely not a tier 1 priority for them. As long as they know what it does and where it is, there's less of a priority put on it from the War Machine community, at least locally. Age of Sigmar has some pretty clearly defined terrain rules, which is great.
It doesn't make me wonder why they've done that for Age of Sigmar and not for 40k.
Age of Sigmar is very much a test bed for a lot of things and it's funny because I see people go, 40k gets that from Age of Sigmar, and I sit there and go, no. 40k had that first because Warhammer Fantasy had it before that, and Fantasy was ported to 40k, and then 40k had it, and then now it's in Age of Sigmar, and now it's going back to 40k again. It's,
everything's cyclical.
Yeah, so, but I do see a lot of the stuff that ends up in Age of Sigmar moving to 40k after it's been through a cycle of testing, and some of them have been more successful than others. Then you hit 40k's terrain rules, which are the weakest point of the game.
Almost non-existent.
They are the fundamentally the worst part of the 8th edition rules. And
in your opinion?
I don't think there'd be too many competitive players who disagree with me. It's also combined with the true line of sight rules that have been implemented by Games Workshop for 8th edition. It's a two-pronged problem. Because if you fix one, the other intrinsically still needs to be adjusted to make work. But what we saw this year for the LVO that's just been and gone was they came out. There's been a lot of negativity around this. They came out about 2 days before lists were due and said, by the way, the top 100 tables are having set terrain. And then on top of that, we expect the players to adjust the terrain depending on which deployment map they roll for the game.
Okay. I don't know that they said we expect the players to do it. I think it was just that...
Well, they don't have the resources to do it for
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, because when I first saw it, that was my initial thought was how many judges or how many officials have they got there to be able to go around and move 500 tables worth of terrain?
It's the top 100.
Oh, yeah, it is only top 100. It's top 100 tables.
Top 100 tables.
Yeah. Well, I guess
which
when I
is
first
still
saw
significant.
I didn't necessarily read the whole thing and did think that they were going to be doing it for 500.
You got to think
but
that's
even 100.
That's 1,000 square meters. Realistically, that's twice WATC.
It's also 2 minutes per table.
At least, yeah.
If you're moving quickly, and by the time you get to the 100th table, I reckon you could do it in 2 minutes.
Well, no, you can't though, because you've got to remember that every table's going to have a different deployment type.
Oh God!
Every table's rolled for individually, which means you'd be getting to the table going, "What are you playing? Hammer and anvil. Cool. This is the way it moves. What are you playing? Oh, we haven't rolled for that yet. We're still doing this.
Hurry up!
Yeah, you'd lose if there were 10 people to do the 100 tables and you had to do 10 tables each. You'd lose half an hour minimum.
Yeah, at least.
Probably more.
Yeah.
So the expectation had to go on the players to adjust it.
Yeah.
Which is good and bad because it means that the players then have an urgency, but at the same time it's bad because you end up in a situation where the tables aren't the same. There can be 2 tables playing hammer and anvil.
They should be the same.
They should be close.
They should be close enough, yeah. I think going all the way back to the beginning with this, and where I guess I wanted to start the discussion, was around we've seen this idea of having set terrain for the tables.
Yeah.
And the idea of having
Atlanta
it for...
GT.
Yeah, and the idea in multiple different events having the set terrain for the top tables, because that way it takes away the element that the terrain is actually impacting on the game. And so the only, if you look at scientific experiments, you only want to change one variable at a time. Well, the only variable that changes is the player skill level. It's actually not, because you've also got the variable of the different army lists. So if you want to just be looking at skill level, everyone has to play the same army as well. But let's not go there. So, maybe we could. Maybe we could just have like one Space Marine tournament. Everyone has to play Space Marines.
That's called Horus Heresy.
I am only joking. Sort of. It's part of my little scientific
No, make
brain
everyone
that
play
would quite
Gene
like to
Stealer
do that.
Cult.
I'm not sure the buy-in is going to be great on that. But so the one variable that changes is the player skill level. So you know that the person who wins is winning because they are the strongest player, because it's not that they were adversely affected by the terrain.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my understanding of the idea behind having set terrain. The downside to that has been that you're playing basically the same mission on the same board over and over again. So how exciting is that for players? Some players are fine with that. Other players,
not so
myself
much
included, really not so much.
Yeah.
So when I saw this and saw that they were actually changing the table layout depending on the deployment type, and people were rolling for deployment, I thought that was potentially quite a good compromise.
Yep.
That was where my brain first went, and then quickly went to, oh my goodness, what's the logistics of that? There is no physical way that you and I could get around all of the tables in order to do that.
No.
Then I went to, if you're putting the responsibility on the players, you have to trust the players are going to put it in the right place. And is this going to be the cause of friction because that's a quarter of an inch too far over?
Yeah, that's not where that goes.
And how many times are we going to be called to a table because it's not in the right place? So then you get to a point, well, do you actually need a pre-printed map like they had in Atlanta, where you've got,
this is where the terrain goes.
The solid spaces, this is where the terrain goes. The dotted lines, if it's in this deployment, this is where the terrain goes. The star-shaped lines, if it's in this deployment, that's where it goes. It was something like that. So,
yeah.
But do we just get everyone playing on a video game?
My biggest argument against this, I'm going to use motorsport again.
Oh God!
It doesn't matter what motorsport we're talking about, except maybe NASCAR, but we don't talk about NASCAR.
I don't talk about any motorsport.
Like if you talk about the Grand Prix, you've got tracks all around the world, and they're not the same track all around the world. They're different tracks that deal with, like the drivers who win the driver championships are still the best drivers.
Yes,
because they adapt to the different.
But
tracks.
everyone who's in that same Grand Prix is actually driving on the same track. So the track changes between different countries.
Yeah.
But you're all still driving the same track. And I guess that's kind of what they're doing with the deployment zones. Everyone has one game where they're playing on this particular map. Everyone has one game where they're playing on this particular map. So
I get what you're saying. I think there's somewhere between what Atlanta did and what LVO tried to do is probably
I like what LVO tried to do.
Yeah.
My initial thought, so we had one of the patrons share it in the patrons only Facebook page, and my initial thought when I saw it was, where's the terrain? Like,
one of the stream games was appalling to watch. It was a Sisters of Battle versus Iron Hands Garbage Army. Actually, it wasn't as bad as the Brohammer list, but it was still an Iron Hands, which is the top tier army.
Okay, why are you calling it a garbage army?
Because it feels like garbage to play against, because it's got so many stackable rules and combos and all the rest of it. It's the best list at the moment, so it puts a lot of people off.
Okay, I think that was very
anyway
interesting choice of words.
The stream game was really dull because they were playing on one of the top tables, and they rolled a deployment type, and the terrain basically just left this giant shooting gallery in the middle of the board that the Space Marines could sit at the back of the table and not essentially engage the game. And the Sisters, by the end of turn 2, were essentially tabled. They weren't. They actually played it out to about turn 4, but it was a really boring game to watch, which basically involved the Sisters player putting models on the table, doing something, and then taking them off the table again. Just one after another, after another, after another, after another. And I've got some photos, which like I said at the start of this episode, that'll be in the show notes on the website with all the details showing the terrain layout for that game. And then I've got photos of the final, where they actually added terrain to that same board. Because
of that, I'm assuming?
Yeah, look, I definitely think that the middle of that table was
And that's one of the
way too
positives
light.
of having so many people drop out. It did mean they had additional terrain to be able to pull from.
Oh, look, I'm sure that they'd catered for more than they needed, but...
I'm sure that they had. I am joking. Actually, no, I'm not. I am serious. That is one of the benefits of it.
It would have been, yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's other stuff like you see with what we saw at the ETC for 2019, where there were a whole bunch of buildings and the now infamous like the Nova L's and the Adeptic. I think it's Nova that does them mostly, where they are 9 by 9 by 9 inches. You can hide knights behind them and flyers behind them. You can put 100 models in cover behind them. We saw it at Atlanta where they had those 2 big buildings at the start of the in the center of the table, so that the tower players could hide drones out of line of sight, but keep everything else out and just dump wounds back onto drones. All of these issues that stem that the community is trying to fix in terms of blocking the ground floor for buildings But
this isn't just blocking the ground floor. This is effectively a 3-story building
that is completely blocked.
Yeah. And so when I initially saw the stuff for what's it called? LVO, sorry. When I initially saw the photos for LVO, I was like, sweet, if that's what players here want, we can make that. We can make 100 tables of terrain of that relatively quickly, relatively inexpensively. Is that a word? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we can make that happen because it was effectively, I think, 8 pieces of terrain. You had 2 of the L shapes and 2
there
hills.
There were 2 forests.
2 forests, 2 hills, and some
craters.
No, not craters. Crates.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The actual solid line of sight blockers.
Yeah. But I would still struggle to put that on a table to have just that L shape with no windows there.
Yeah, look, it's... I think
it comes down to a question of should you be able to hide a Titan behind a building?
Yeah, look, I think there's an argument for scale as well, because I've seen people go, well, hang on a minute.
Okay, we've had scale leap in models, but haven't necessarily had scale leap in buildings.
They argue that if you want to be thematic about it for 40K, the buildings in 40K wouldn't be 1 or 2 stories tall. They'd be 20 stories tall. This is the far future. This is, those buildings shouldn't be only 2 or 3 stories tall. They should be dozens of stories tall.
And yet, interestingly, what we've seen in architecture has been that the massive high-rises that happen, around WA, around Perth, that we're not getting the massive high-rises anymore.
No.
We're getting smaller buildings because it's much more boutique to be in, and obviously we're talking about...
It's also cheaper.
Yeah,
building up costs more.
We're talking about 2020 compared to...
40,000.
Well, yeah, compared to 1980 to 2020 compared to the year 40,000. So I'm working on a 40-year thing compared to a 40,000. But who says that they would be 120 stories tall?
And that...
Unless it says it in the stories.
From a pure game mechanic perspective... I've had people tell me that you should be able to hide 100+ infantry models turn 1 out of line of sight of your opponent. To me,
but can you with the terrain that they had
with those big 9 by 9 by 9 buildings?
They weren't 9 by 9. No, the LVO ones they were.
But even the Atlanta ones, they were 12 by 9 by 6. So there's still
12 across, 9 high?
No, 6 high.
Oh, 6 high.
Okay. There were ones that were... So there were flatter ones and there were taller ones. Mm. My point is, though, that by the time you do the maths on just the floor space of that ruin, you can put 50 models in there comfortably without really trying. And more if you've got small... Like if you're on 25mm bases, you obviously get more in there compared to if you're on 32s or 40s. And... I think it all kind of ties together where people feel like they need to be able to hide the whole army so they don't get shot off the board turn 1. And I get that. At the same time, it becomes a game of chicken at that point, where if you can hide everything of yours and I can hide everything of mine, and I'm going second, then I can afford to call your bluff.
Yeah, and just wait it out.
Which is just a boring game.
It is. We have talked about in the past that running and hiding is a perfectly acceptable strategy.
Yeah.
But at the same time...
It doesn't make for an enjoyable day.
You don't necessarily... I was going to say, you don't want it to be every single turn, do you? In every game.
And
I wouldn't.
You end up in this situation where you go, okay, we need to be able to hide some things, which is where those sort of shipping container style pieces of terrain come in, where you can't necessarily hide in them, but you can use them to block key avenues of approach and that sort of thing. And I think a lot of the time with this, going down that road of shipping containers or billboards or smaller line of sight blocking pieces, and then placing them appropriately on the table goes way further than simply putting more L-shaped ruins that are 9 inch by 9 by 9. Because what you're those ruins just do too much. You want to have the game to be engaging, and at the moment, when you just do 12 ruins that are...
And I guess that's the other thing as well, that with you're talking about the game of chicken, with, and I'm going to use a term that was thrown at us at Masters, if you've got boards that are Planet Bowling Ball with very little terrain on them, but your only pieces of terrain are those two massive L's, you don't want to come out from behind there.
No.
So, and that was one of the other things that I struggled with when I saw it. Like the table that we had so we've got some very vocal players who told us that one of the boards at Masters last year was not okay because it didn't have enough terrain on it. Now that board had more terrain on it than what we saw for Atlanta or for LVO. So we've got WA players who are telling us that the amount that's more than what they were doing for LVO isn't enough because it's Planet Bowling Ball and there's no line of sight and there's no... So if you've only got two main pieces, then surely it's going to lead to a gameplay system where a game of chicken is actually your most likely outcome.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we saw with the final of the LVO, was they kind of...
3 turns of playing chicken and then, okay, right, I'm coming for you.
Yeah. And it's... As a TO, it's a hard one to try and balance because you're in this situation where you want the games to be fun and engaging. The rules at the moment don't make that very hard on you because you only need to see the tiniest component of the enemy model with the tiniest component of your own model to shoot, and getting any sort of benefit from cover is very hard. You end up in this situation where I'd rather just be out of line of sight. So line of sight blocking becomes really important. The problem with all these big solid buildings and nothing else, you end up with these fire corridors where you've got buildings 12 inches apart and you can draw a line from your side of the board to my side of the board with nothing in between. And then you're having to try and terrain hop. Now that instantly changes the type of army you build, because once you know that, you know you have to be able to cover 12 to 14 inches a turn. You have to be able to move over things or through the ruins, or it's going to artificially change what's good and what's not as well. Anything that ignores
maybe
line
not artificially, but it is going to change it.
Yeah. So this all comes back though to the line of sight rules being literal as opposed to being a little bit abstract. And literal is easy. Abstract in prior editions was harder to explain, but worked better.
Yeah.
And because of the literal nature of the line of sight rules, the terrain becomes, if you have open ground floors and ruins, you end up in this situation where, cool, I'm in a building, but I can see you. And they've amped the damage up in the game so that if I can see you, I can shoot you, and it becomes a more bloody game straight away. So you need somewhere to hide.
So just wondering, the army that won LVO and had quite a few of those armies in the top 10.
The Iron Hands, which also won CanCon.
Yes, but I'm not sure what the terrain was like at CanCon, which is why I focused only on LVO. Are they is that the kind of army that benefits from this sort of terrain?
So Richard was originally playing Tau at, he won the Atlanta GT with Tau. And I think he was very clever that when he built the Space Marine, he's outright come out and said his Tau wouldn't beat the Iron Hands that he made. I also think part of the conversation was around the terrain and the way the terrain was placed, because the Tau army that he had wouldn't have necessarily worked as well as it did on the LVO top 100 tables as the Imperial, as the Iron Hands did. And taking away some of the stuff around the Iron Hands combos and stratagems at the moment, which were obviously key to that army doing what it did. The final against the Raven Guard was all focused around that one of those big buildings which blocked line of sight, and the Raven Guard were using that to advance because then they couldn't be shot by the Iron Hands with anything that things like Thunderfire cannons could, obviously. But that terrain became pivotal, but the whole game centered around that one piece of terrain because it blocked line of sight. And it was 6 inches tall, 9 inches tall, whatever it was. I do think that the terrain rules aren't good. There are problems with them and they need adjusting. And I honestly think most of the terrain rules could actually be fixed pretty comfortably by looking at some of the Apocalypse rules and combining them with some of the AOS rules. And moving on.
Funnily enough, that's not the first time I've heard you say that.
No. But, I mean, I don't pretend to be one of Games Workshop's game designers, but I've been playing a long time, and I have play-tested for other companies. And I feel like Games Workshop still in the mindset of, this is a cool, fun game, we play with friends, we play at home, and that's the disconnect.
And that's
for
something
them.
that I've complained about quite a few times, that, you know, we're building Games Workshop terrain, and yet I'm having to go and stick bits on the back of it to cover up windows because we now need all the windows blocked up.
Yeah.
Well, if we need the windows blocked up, why aren't they coming with blocked up windows? And it's because of that, because
Games Workshop
they're
think
not necessarily
it's a fun
seeing
narrative,
it as a competitive
cool,
game.
fun game, yep, rah, rah, rah. And
Which may mean that there are thousands of people around the world who are playing it wrong. Did anybody consider that?
I think it's the nature of humans to want to compete at things, though, to find out who's the best at things.
Not me.
You are competitive, just in different things.
Not really, because I don't want to be found to be rubbish. So I don't want to be in anything that's competitive, because I might not actually be as good at it as I think I am. So in my head, I'll just live with being good at it, and then let's not put it to the test.
But
may have just revealed a little bit too much about myself there.
But when you do have these, and as organisers, we're in the same boat. When you get people together that go, okay, we want to compete, we want to, you try and find the best way to build an army, and you start. It's why we uncover so many holes in the rules. It's why we've got this cogitated martyrdom combo with the Leviathan at the moment that is just so. It needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
It is that busted.
Yeah.
That it needs to be addressed and changed, and it's such an easy change. I've said it on a couple of Facebook groups now, and it's one of my most liked comments ever because it's one they've already used to resolve another issue. And it just, they had a combo with the Whirlwind Scorpius, going off topic, that was allowing it to use the standard Whirlwind stratagems. And they turned around and said, cool, it doesn't have the Whirlwind keyword anymore. It has the Whirlwind Scorpius keyword instead. Now it can't use the stratagem. Go to all the Forge World Dreadnoughts and take away the Dreadnought keyword and replace it with Leviathan Dreadnought, Deredeo Dreadnought, Chaplain Dreadnought, whatever it is, Mortis Dreadnought.
Yeah.
And all of the problems go away because all of a sudden they can't use the stratagems that are being used on these Forge World Dreadnoughts that everyone complains about to do the things that it does. And again, all that'll do is just change the players and they'll move to playing something else.
Okay, now I know that
But
it's not
it's
like
such
me
an
to
easy
do
fix.
this, but I'm going to pull us back to talking about terrain.
So easy.
I think terrain would be relatively easy to fix
Yeah.
as well. We just need some, I guess, direction. That would really help. It would take out the need to interpret things and,
Like I say, it
debate
all
around magic boxes and all of those kinds of things.
Well, that was an interesting part about the LVO is the top 100 tables, despite the frontline gaming community and the ITC heads essentially creating the rules for magic boxes, there were none on the top 100 tables, which creates another weird dynamic in the room because now you have to build an army. And up until that point, you got to remember 2 days before lists were due, people were building with the standard LVO format in mind.
Ah, okay, right. I didn't realise that it had only been announced 2 days before.
And then 2 days before lists are due, they said, okay, the top 100 tables have standardised terrain. These are the photos of all the terrain. These are the photos of how it's all going to be laid out. There you go. Now all of a sudden you're sort of going, well, hang on a minute. I could play day one and not be on the top 100 tables and have to deal with
So I need to have a
magic boxes. And then I could end up on the top 100 tables for day two and then not have any of those to use for myself or have to deal with those myself. And that changes the game again. Now, that's absolutely no different to going to a standard tournament where the terrain is random.
Yeah, that's true.
But at the same time...
But it does mean that... So what I was asking before about the Iron Hands is that he couldn't actually tailor his list to suit that kind of terrain because he wasn't going to be using it for the first...
Potentially, yeah. Depending on how they seeded and where they put you on the tables for round 1 through 3, I guess.
And if they did do it seeded, then he may have known that he was going into it playing...
And just going to stay on the top 100 tables the whole weekend if he kept winning.
Well, and if you... Okay, this is not my general thought pattern, but if you do drop a game, you're not going to win, so it doesn't necessarily matter.
Yeah.
You know, whereas if you've tailored your list to the top 100, you know that you're seeded as number 5. He knows that he's starting out on the top tables. Chances are he's either going to be staying on them or it doesn't matter anyway because he's not winning.
Yeah, that's true. It's the players who go in unseeded
or
low-seeded.
Low-seeded, yeah.
That then have a good run.
Well, and then, so that's an added difficulty for those players. You know, you've got the top players who have an unfair advantage.
Assuming it's seeded, yeah.
Assuming it's seeded, and I have no idea if it is seeded, but something for us to think about, that if you've got top players who are seeded high, then they're going to be able to tailor their lists to that, to the, you know, the top 100 tables, as opposed to players who are likely to have a harder run of it anyway because they're not seeded as high, but then they also have to be able to have a versatile list that plays in multiple different terrain scenarios. Whereas at the moment, it's even. Everybody's got multiple different terrain scenarios, and so you have to have a versatile list.
Yeah, or the flip side is that, like at Atlanta, the terrain was the same for every game.
Everyone, yeah.
Which meant that you could build knowing that.
Yeah.
So, LVO created this unique proposition there, and we've been talking about doing the same thing for sort of the top 5, top 8 tables here.
Well, you've been talking about it. Me, not so much.
No.
I have suggested, and I'm going to float this again, although I'm not sure that I'll actually, you know, with me saying, oh, how hard would it be to make that many tables? Who knows? But whether or not we do actually trial this for First Blood Part 2.
What, sort of trying to standardise them a bit?
Yeah. If it's only forests, hills, and the L's, how hard would it be to create 20 tables of that?
Well, there's plenty of MDF companies out there now as well that if you don't want to go through the effort...
We've got plenty of MDF set out in the dungeon, though.
Yeah. And to be honest, if you were doing it at home, I wouldn't do it with MDF anyway. I'd do it with foam core or core float. But, which we have both of. Just because it's lighter and easier to cut.
It's harder to paint. It's harder to paint core float. It's not hard to paint the...
foam core.
Foam core. And foam core is lighter. It's easier to pin because you can actually pin it using
pins,
dress pins, as opposed to having to use nails and glue. And well, you'd still have to use glue and pins, but
no, and that's exactly
I'm
right.
I'm sure that they would survive our events if we did it using foam. Using foam core.
No, but as an exercise in, you know, buying a couple of cans of texture paint, painting over the outsides of them with texture paint. And building these big L's, you can stack dozens of them in one tub, and then you can go, cool, every table gets...
Oh my God, how much easier would that be to get to and from events?
Every table gets 4 L's or 5 or whatever it is.
Well, it was 2 at LVO. I said I could match LVO. I didn't say I could do more than LVO. I said I could match it.
My point
even that, I'm not sure. I may have spoken too soon. We might be having a terrain building day.
My point is that doing that actually would be relatively easy. You'd stack it up, and you'd be able to, like a 100-litre tub that we use at the moment for one of the big boards would cover 5, 6, 7 more just with...
Yeah, and if we magnetise the bottom of it, you could then pull them apart to stick on bases.
I just put bases on them.
Do you mean just sit them on bases or actually glue them on bases?
Glue them on bases.
They don't stack as well if you glue them on bases?
Well, no, if everyone has a base and there's no flaws in it, it doesn't matter.
It depends how you make the base. Oh, I guess when I was thinking about it, I would extend beyond the wall. But if you don't extend beyond the wall, of course, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. And that's essentially what we're talking about, is none of the ones...
Yeah, see, I struggle with it. I really struggle with the idea of not making them pretty.
Yeah. Because we want to create an experience. And looking at slabs that are texture painted in grey granite...
With no windows.
That are 9 by 9 by 9 is... it's a real disconnect from... At that point, you start going, well, why am I painting and spending all this time painting my models really well? If I can just put the base colours down, who cares? Because that's the standard that's being set. And I think it's one of the things I really like. So there's a Victorian TO who's gone down the road of trying to design his own L-shaped buildings in MDF. He's had them laser cut, and he started painting them, and they're perfectly serviceable. The guys at Alliance Open have spent the last year doing the same thing, and they've been developing a whole range of MDF terrain, but their L's actually have a second layer on the outside of them that have like the arches of where the windows would be and have the arches where the doors would be. They're still solid, but it gives you another surface you can dry brush if you want to. It gives you some shape and contrast on the outside.
Yeah.
It's going to cost more because obviously there's more materials and there's more cutting, and it's coming from Amsterdam or wherever they produce it, probably Poland or somewhere like that, as opposed to coming out of Melbourne for us. But at the same time...
And supporting Australian. Yeah.
So you're in this position of, do I want the pretty one or do I want the cheap one?
Which, I mean, we're talking about events, so I guess it's different for people who are playing at home in your living room.
Oh, if you're making one table for yourself, then you can afford to spend the extra and go the pretty one.
Okay, well, so what I was going to say is if you're just going the serviceable one, why not just use a packet of cornflakes and a Pringles tube?
Or go down to the local art shop, spend $12 on a piece of core flute or foam core, and build the L's yourself.
I really wouldn't use core flute.
No, core flute's a pain, but foam core.
I would definitely go foam core. I just want to put out there, I really don't encourage anyone to try and make anything out of core flute.
Squares.
It's actually not that easy even to do squares.
Well, that's true.
Because I use core flute as reflectors for photography, and it's not easy. So
maybe you're using them that are 8 feet high and like.
Yes, they are.
Maybe it's easier when they're 9 inches square.
Yeah, it's difficult to line your corners up and stuff like that, and be able to how do you join them, because you haven't actually got any surface there, because where you've cut it, you've sort of got an indent. So no, so you've just got like these two, not even a millimetre thick bits of plastic that you're trying to. So anyway, I just don't encourage anyone to try with core flute unless you happen to be very experienced working with core flute. Go the foam
or you're a
core.
terrain freak like George.
George uses foam core.
Yeah, I'm sure he could use core flute.
Okay. Actually, I do think he did take a fair bit of it after the first show to see if he could make terrain from it. So, yeah. And we use the term terrain freak in the most lovingly way possible.
He's awesome. There's a bunch of his DIY terrain that's...
No, it's DIY.
Oh, that's right. He did get that wrong. Dyslexic, but awesome at building a terrain.
That's why we have a MEAG battle as well, because he got mega wrong.
So this is sort of some of the stuff that you end up going around in circles with as a TO, and having to cater to the majority of the community.
Can I just say that George jokes about that, so that's why it's okay for us too. So we're not actually making fun of people who have dyslexia.
We're not making fun of it.
We embrace it and love it and think that it's fantastic, and that's why we had a MEAG battle and didn't change it to Mega.
Yeah.
Just thought I'd put that out as a little disclaimer. If you've got dyslexia, please don't contact us and say that we're being
horrible,
disrespectful, because we're really not. We're being inclusive. I'll stop now.
Okay.
Feel free to edit that out.
Oh, no. I only edit out when I say dumb things.
All right, okay, yeah, leave all mine in.
Yeah, that's the advantage of being the editor.
You say so many more dumb things than me. That's not fair.
That's why we record for 3 hours and it's an hour and a half episode. So yeah, part of the issue that you have as an organiser is understanding what your community wants and catering for the majority of the community, because you're never going to be able to please everyone. And one of the advantages of having multiple organisers in a community is that you can afford to be different from the other organisers and give a different experience. And there'll be some players that will go to everything, and there'll be some players that don't want to play certain formats, and there'll be some players that will only play other formats. So having a few organisers in the community can be really positive, because it lets you kind of do what you want to do as long as the community continues to support it. And one of the things that we've seen for our events is that there's a fairly decent component of that community that like the variation in the terrain, that don't necessarily want standardised terrain for every board.
Sadly, though, they're often not the most vocal.
No, they're not.
And that's what gets really difficult, because what we hear most is wanting the standard terrain, wanting something that is 9 inches high, so that
I want to be able to put a knight behind it or a flyer behind it.
That's right.
I really genuinely have a problem with flyers being behind an L-shaped building.
Yeah. So
I'd do it if you gave it to me at a tournament. Like if I've rocked up to play at Atlanta or something and you give me that terrain, then yeah, of course I'm going to use it.
But we just don't necessarily want.
But from an aesthetic point of view, it's just a real problem for me.
So my point was that the people who are most vocal tend to be the ones who want that standardised terrain. They want to be able to say that it was their skill that won them the game rather than the terrain that was on the table.
That lost them the game.
That lost them the game.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess my difficulty is that the loudest voice doesn't necessarily represent the majority.
No.
And I want to make sure that we're catering to the majority and not catering to a vocal minority.
And that's
which is really difficult.
And that was one of the compromises that we've been talking about, is doing those top 5 or 8 boards at specific events.
Yeah, I think for something like Masters and WATC, well, obviously no WATC.
WATC is a whole other problem.
It's one or none.
So what you end up in doing is saying, okay, well, we recognise the fact that there's a group of people coming to a particular type of event that are coming to compete to win that event.
And that's why I'm suggesting doing it for First Blood Part 2 as well, because it is an ITC event.
That's it. All the soft scores come out and all the rest of it, and it is a competitive event.
And for me, this terrain feels harder. Like it, and by harder I mean less squishy.
Doesn't mean it make anything. Doesn't help me.
Less narrative, less.
Yeah, it's a clinical table with.
Yeah, less squishy.
Okay. I'd actually, you know what I'd actually prefer to do than doing the LVO tables for this? I'd actually prefer to do the Atlanta GT tables.
Perfect. Could you just give me an out? If I can't get it done, it's because you changed it.
I haven't changed anything.
Totally could have done LVO, but Atlanta, I'm not sure if I can manage that.
Oh, really? They're squares. Even the craters and the remember the...
Yeah, see, I struggle with the idea of having square MDF hills.
And square craters and square forests.
Yeah.
With no trees on them.
That I really struggle with. I mean, awesome. But I do struggle with the idea of that, because what can be hidden in those forests?
Well, at that point, it just becomes area terrain where it doesn't block line of sight at all. It just means that infantry get a saving throw. Which essentially...
And how does that impact
it? Essentially makes it pointless, which is exactly what I saw on the stream when they were doing a practice game in the lead up to the event. They'd literally taken the craters and forests off the table because the mats already had them marked where they should be, but they were so irrelevant that they didn't even need to go on.
I'm not building something if it's irrelevant and it's coming off.
But this is what I'm saying.
So I'd rather compromise and go, okay, well, I can make 35 craters. Well, no, obviously it needs to be 2 per table. I can make 40 craters relatively quickly and easily.
So we could, we've got the vinyl sticker battlescapes. We could actually get one of the forest tables.
Yeah.
Chop that into 12 by 6 pieces.
That's what we
for
did
War
for
Machine.
War Machine, yeah.
And stick them down and go, cool, all of these are forests. And then go to the Mars table and cut 6 by 6 ones out of that and go, there's all the craters. And then go to, you know what I mean? Like, it'd be easy for us to make it clearly visible for what the players are dealing with.
Just if you're listening, you can't see my face, but
it's a look of disgust. I'm
really not on board with this.
But this is like that's essentially what they did with the craters and the forests.
Yeah, and I guess the thing is that we have to cater to the community that's coming to our events, but we still have to be okay with it as well.
But there's also the downside is that if you want to encourage people to come to Western Australia to play events, you also have to give them a reason to come over. Other than we think the terrain's cool, if they expect a standardised type of terrain.
Yeah, but I still think we can do a standardised type of terrain while actually cutting a hill out of a piece of foam.
Yeah. Oh, look, the hills that they did for Atlanta were the shipping containers stepped. They didn't actually have hills. They counted them as hills until I pointed out on their Facebook page that hills didn't actually have any rules, and then they changed the rules and made their own for them.
And I know that LVO said they had hills as well, but I think that they were shipping containers
yeah, they were.
as well.
They weren't actually hills because hills don't exist in the game.
Yeah. So,
And I've actually got some that were given to us by someone else, some shipping containers that are 3x3 and 6x3 and a few different shapes. So it wouldn't be hard for us to use those to then generate enough terrain to put shipping containers in stacks on every table.
Yeah. And then we've got lots of... I know LVO had a couple where they had, like there was 2 small pieces of scatter terrain on each table as well. So that would be relatively easy to get some scatter terrain like that.
I think from our point of view, the first thing I mean, we mentioned very briefly, Emma did at least, doing a terrain building day. Now, that's actually a serious thing.
Yes.
We're going to look to do that sometime in the next month or two, sometime around March maybe. And
when's First Blood? Part
April.
2? March sounds good.
And we're going to supply all the materials. We're going to feed you. You're going to come around.
It won't be anything exciting.
No, it'll be pizza or a barbecue or something.
It'll probably be more. Anyway, carry on.
Yeah, you can decide the food.
Yeah. I'm going to say it'll be me that's cooking, so it'll be...
And you don't, well, sometimes you want me cooking, but in this case,
not very often.
Hey, you be nice.
I appreciate you cooking, even though it's barely edible.
It's more than barely edible, thank you very much. Back on topic, what we'll probably do over the next week or so is trying to get a set of something comparable, at least in terms of size and shape, to Atlanta or to what we've seen for LVO together, to kind of go, well, this is the amount of terrain that it would be. It'd be really interesting to see whether it does actually fill a third of the board like we aim to do. Because
I honestly don't think it could.
And that's it. One of the biggest things I think is that if we actually, Atlanta being a great example of standardized terrain for every board, if we actually put that together, just in like cut out pieces of paper, and when this is how much terrain you would actually get, I think a lot of players would be
a massive outcry.
I think there'd be a lot of shocked players out there, because we've done everything we can to put more and more terrain on, and up the line of sight blocking.
Yeah.
And I feel like as soon as you go to one of those other sort of events, you might be in for a rude awakening as to how much terrain is actually on some of these boards. But I don't know that, because I've got to go through and basically get I've got a piece of foam core outside.
Lots of paper.
Well, that's it. It might just be a case of making some templates, drawing it all out, and then saying, okay, well, build one so that we know we've got one table's worth. This is what we're building, and then have some people around to help cut cut foam core and glue foam core and build all the buildings and, put it together. Because having that as an option in our terrain set, so that we can say, okay, for the competitive events, we've got these 3 tubs of buildings that are going to go on every board. That's an option, and then we can take them off and put them in separate tubs when we do our narrative and hobby events.
Yeah.
Things like the Necron board, which look fantastic on the table, aren't as practical as some of the other tables that we have, and I don't want to stop using that board. But at the same time, it's not a great table for...
It's not a master's table, but it's definitely a First Blood table.
Yeah, absolutely. And we used it at First Blood because it looks awesome.
Yeah. And we have it, it's painted, looks fantastic, and has a matching mat.
Yeah. So, yeah, look, I feel like if Games Workshop... I mean, there was a rumour doing the rounds recently that was going to be a 9th edition coming, which was debunked because someone had actually made up a pretend press release from LVO that said 9th this is coming and this, that, or other. I feel like that's the next step in the evolution of the game, is to go back in and try and address the line of sight, which in turn starts addressing the terrain. And if you do those two things, you'd actually have a really good game on your hands.
But we have no control over that.
No, we don't.
Which is sad.
I think that if you fix both of those things, and you don't want to go back to the days of 2nd edition and 1st edition with fire arcs and angles of movement and all the other bits. You want the game to actually be able to be completed in 3 hours as opposed to a day.
Yeah. And it's complex enough.
Yeah. People who say it got dumbed down are a bit naive in that regard, because it's still a hugely complex game.
Well, I guess it's all relative, isn't it? Like, it has still been dumbed down, but it's still a heck of a lot more complex than a game of Monopoly.
It requires a different thought pattern to the previous editions. And if they turned around and said, okay, cool, they went back to size categories like they had in 5th edition, and... a size 1 can always shoot over a size, can't see over a size 2 wall, then it wouldn't matter whether your antenna's poking over the top of it, or whether you've got your model's got its arms in the air, or its wingtips can see over the, those sort of abstract things like they do with Infinity.
Oh, so we've just solved modelling for Advantage as well.
Yeah, it does. It actually fixes a huge range of issues, but it abstracts it enough that it makes it hard for the new player to pick up, because you have to then start understanding... And
how do you label all of your... pieces of terrain, that this is a size 2 piece of terrain and this is...
Well, they were actually pretty clear, like when they did it in the older editions,
Yeah.
You only had 3 sizes, 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, and I know one was 1 story and then the other one was 2 story and then it was 3 story, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I am aware of that, but I think that it does become a little bit difficult when you're looking at homemade terrain and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, but again, they could set guidelines up to go.
Yeah, it's easy enough.
You know,
3 inches is this.
3.
6
Yeah,
inches,
well, that's
9
it.
inches.
Yeah, because their buildings themselves, I think, are 6 inches tall these days because they changed the scale on the ruins. So that'd be a size 3 or 4 or whatever they decided it would be. And you could do it by base size for for characters and models and infantry. Like, there's a whole range of ways of doing it, but it does require them to rip the Band-Aid off around modelling because at the moment there's no standard base size chart because they've changed the base sizes on so many different units in the last 3 years. Space Marines have changed, Necrons have changed, a bunch of the Chaos stuff's changed. They're just starting to change the Eldar now to 28mm instead of 25mm because I don't know why.
All right, so we've come up with the solution for...
It's a rewrite.
Yeah.
The terrain rules, the line of sight rules, and that fixes the modelling for advantage. But you do have to supply a base size chart and a unit size chart so that you can know what sizes all the units are in comparison to the terrain.
Okay, that has another issue with it, but we'll just leave that and let that slide.
And I'm sure that their game designers have had this very conversation of gone,
oh, it's too hard. Just put it back in the cupboard. Leave the manual as it is. It's all good. No, I was just going to say, so we've managed to solve the issue around terrain and modelling for advantage. Next episode, we'll be tackling Brexit, and the one after that, coronavirus.
Oh, dear.
So back to LVO very quickly before we do wrap up this. It's just been 10 minutes that we've chatted about this?
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect.
With a 4 or a 5 at the start. How long this next 2 minutes go.
So, so back to LVO. I'm guessing since they added more terrain that they responded to
their community.
And they just saw that it was the level of terrain that they put on those top tables did not necessarily work as well as they had hoped. The photos that I've got from the Twitch stream on day 1, I think it was day 1, compared to the photos of the final that I have, you'll actually see there's extra terrain been added on day 3. Now, whether that was as a direct result of some of the feedback they got from earlier games, I don't know. Yeah.
I didn't watch all the streams. So, the undertaking of LVO to take nothing away from them, to put 500 tables of terrain down on 6x4s in that room is a monolithic task. I don't think it can be understated quite how insane that is. I mean, we've put down 100 tables at show, and we've put down...
Oh, more than that at...
150 at show,
yeah.
And we put down 60 at WATC, and those are huge tasks. Even with helpers, that is a huge task.
Yeah, and I guess, show becomes difficult because... So I had a plan drawn, which... I thought would make it easier because people could just look at it and know what kind of terrain went on what tables. Yeah, that didn't work.
No.
It was great in my head, not so much in real life. But they had that as well. They weren't just putting down 500 tables worth of 40k terrain.
No, exactly.
They had War Machine, they had AOS, they had
the 40k narrative, they had Horus Heresy, they still had X-Wing and Malifaux and Age of Sigmar competitive, Age of Sigmar narrative. They had... Even
just putting out table numbers for all of those events.
Yeah. It is apocalyptic.
If you haven't done it, I know that sounds really ridiculous. How hard is it to go and put table numbers out on a table? There's 500 table numbers going out.
Each one of those...
plus X number for this event, plus X number for that event. Somebody needs to be collating how many table numbers need to go down, where those tables are going to be situated, and how you're going to divide between them.
The physical time to do it.
Yeah.
If you've got 500 tables and each table is 2 meters long, that's a kilometre that you're walking to put those table numbers out.
Yeah.
Back and forth down the aisles.
Yeah.
That's insane.
I reckon they got their 10,000 steps up.
Yeah. You can't take anything away from the organisers at LVO because the task that they have in front of them every year is monumental. It is the biggest gaming event in the world in terms of tournaments.
Yeah.
And what they do is nothing short of amazing. Is it perfect? No. But no event is perfect.
No.
And there's always room to do things better each year.
Which they seem to be doing.
Which they take it on board and they do make changes, which is great. So we can't take anything away from the hard work that Frankie and Reese and all of their other support staff offer to the community in that regard. It's an amazing thing they do. And if you haven't been to LVO and you have the opportunity to go, I would really, really strongly suggest you go. It's an amazing experience. It's a fantastic event. And for no other reason than just the atmosphere in those rooms is just mind-blowing.
So it definitely wasn't intending to take anything away from them. I just wanted to...
It's a great example. It's the biggest 40K event in the world.
Yeah.
And it gives us a good...
benchmark, I guess, or something to aspire to. But I guess I wanted to reflect on the fact that amount of terrain was probably... based on what we've seen from, the first games going into the third day, they made some changes.
Yeah.
Why they made those, we don't really know. We can only make assumptions that they decided that they needed to fill some of those gaps.
Yep.
I do wonder how it went getting the players to actually rearrange the terrain. Because I do think it's a brilliant idea that the terrain changes depending on your deployment.
Yeah, and if you've got standardised terrain that you can move around, then that actually makes that pretty straightforward.
Well, I think if you've got random terrain, then I don't think there's a need to move your terrain based on deployment. And when we do set up the terrain, we do try and make sure that regardless of deployment type, you're going to have line of sight blockers and you're going to have places to hide. But for this, because I think that changing that terrain layout does get rid of one of the issues that we've heard complained about, in that you're playing the same game every single time.
Yeah, and...
same game on the same board. Well, you're not playing on the same board because the board is moving around, unless you happen to get hammer and anvil for 6 games in a row, which, Alex Daniford got exactly the same table for every game down in Albany 2 years in a row, I think.
And then didn't tell us.
No, then it became a thing that he wanted it. So it can happen, but you'd have to be pretty unlucky to get 6 games where you've got the same deployment.
Yeah. But you know what? There's ways around that where you could easily turn around and say, okay, cool, we're not doing random deployments anymore. We got 6 rounds. We got 6 deployment maps. Everyone plays Dawn of War in round 1. Everyone, when you get to the table, make sure the terrain is deployed like this. Yeah. Everyone in round 2 is playing Vanguard Strike. This is the way the terrain goes. Everyone move it around.
Not if you're on a 4x4 board.
No, Vanguard's a bit confusing on 4x4. But you could actually do that, which in turn means that...
We'll make a note of this because when you're writing the players pack, you might have to.
Well, ITC doesn't do it at the moment. ITC rolls for deployment.
I know.
But,
right,
if they did go down that road for something like LVO, that takes another variable out, because that means if they're going to standardise the terrain, then you could afford to tell everyone to move it for every round by standardising the deployment map for everyone, because that way you're taking another variable out.
And it also...
because you're going to play all 6.
That's it. And it also...
and then just randomise the final 3 rounds.
Also reduces the amount of time needed for that. You're not having to wait to... Like, you can go over there, or, if players finish their game early...
Well, that's it. You could actually reset the table for the next round.
Exactly. So you may only have a couple of boards that need resetting at the start of a game as opposed to all of them.
Yeah. So, as you can tell, this topic is...
Oh, yeah, no, you didn't actually answer my question. How do you think it went, having players move the terrain around?
Okay. I know that they ran late on day 1. It wasn't terrain related, though.
Okay.
It was...
I'm not sure why you brought it up.
Well, because it ran so late and because there were so many issues on day 1, I don't think you can use day 1 as an accurate representation of how it went, because there was so much downtime because of technical issues. So anything that happened on day 1 in regards to moving the terrain around, you're not going to know. There isn't just no way of figuring that out. The fact that day 2 ran on time, within half an hour, which as far as I'm concerned for a tournament is on time, tells me that either the judges and support staff they had on hand were able to resolve any small issues that arose, or there were no issues in the first place.
Yeah.
So I would assume
it went okay.
While you're on those top tables in particular, because that's the other thing.
Was it only the top 100?
If it's the top 100 and the players who are on the top 100 in theory are the ones who are the most competitive, who are the ones who are most invested in making sure it's right, then in turn there's going to be an agreement between the two players is, are you happy with the terrain? I think I've got it right. Yeah. Can we tweak this? Can we tweak that? Are we both happy? Yes. As opposed to a player going, okay, I put it all out. No, I don't like that. Well, I think you're wrong. Well, I think you're wrong. Judge.
Yeah.
I saw one of them.
I don't know. There's part of me that thinks, well, if you're playing on table number 300, are you more likely to be a bit chilled about it? Whereas if you're on the top table, are you more likely to be more...
But see, that's not the experience that I've had at those big events. I've actually found some of the lower tables to be more heated than the top ones, because I think there's an assumed level of knowledge and comfort in those top tables where you go, cool, you're at table 12.
Yeah.
You clearly know what's going on. While you might be you might be playing hard, there's a mutual sort of, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Whereas on the lower tables, particularly if you've had a couple of bad losses and you're feeling a bit sore, you're more likely to arc up and go, well, no, this...
Interesting.
So...
Could go either way.
Yeah, who knows?
Who knows? People could just be awesome and nobody could complain.
The vast majority of the tournament population are.
Yeah.
And it's only the vocal minority that you ever see online complaining and saying
and they're not
awful.
The same vocal minority that are... Anyway.
Yeah.
So you didn't see anything online with all the conversation around how that it had gone terribly or, because I think people would only post about it if it had gone terribly.
Nothing that's jumped out.
The fact that we haven't heard anything to me probably means that it went okay.
No, the guys from Goonhammer had written a fairly extensive review on their experience at LVO. Most of them went 4-2 or 3-3. I think everyone did at least 3-3. And they have some feedback around things they would change and how things could be done better, but there was no comments there around the top 100 tables. And if you went 4-2, you probably ended up in one of those top 100 tables, maybe at the 90 end. But
still up there, yeah.
If you went 4-2, you're probably up there somewhere.
Yeah.
If not far away. And depending on when you lost, you could have been on there for the early parts of the event anyway.
Yeah, true.
But no, I've read their reviews and no one mentioned there being issues with moving the terrain around. So that's a positive thing to hear.
I have hope. If we do give it a go for First Blood Part 2.
Oh, maybe not moving it, but doing some standard terrain maybe. Baby steps.
See, for me, I'd rather rip the Band-Aid off. If we're going to do standard terrain, I like the idea. That's part of it that makes it most appealing to me, is that it is actually a different table for every deployment.
Oh, see, I'd do it like Atlanta and go, here it is for every table for every game.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't. I would be different deployment, different map. We can argue about that later.
Or you can post your comments on the Facebook page or in the comments section.
Only if you agree with me.
Or you can agree with me and, that would be nice.
You could, but you do need to remember I'm the one that serves the beer.
I'm the one who gives them their points.
Yeah, I still think they appreciate my role in it more than yours.
Yeah, potentially. So, to all you out there who are listening, let us know what you think about standardized terrain. Let us know what you think about the LVO terrain. If you want to check out the photos from Las Vegas Open 2020, there's 2 shots in the show notes, so you can go and check those out now. Let us know what you think about the terrain and the density, and whether you'd be up for helping out with a big terrain day one day to try and get a whole bunch more standard terrain set up for the competitive OBSEC events later in the year. In the meantime, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be back to wrap up the episode in just a second.
We're coming back.
Yes.
Nobody wants to listen to us anymore. We're done.
We're tough. No, we've got one more bit. So I've got a couple of other little things to quickly cover before we wrap up this episode.
Awesome, because I got nothing.
First of all, I want to talk about Five Titans in Fallon, Nevada.
Okay. I was actually just thinking about him. I thought he will say, anybody up to come around and help? He'll go, yeah, I will be. It's a bit tricky, Josh.
It's a bit of a trip.
Yeah.
They have just moved.
Ah.
They were... the venue they were in when they first opened their doors was a temporary venue.
Ah.
So Saturday the 1st, they had their grand opening in their official location.
Oh, cool.
143 South Main Street in Fallon, Nevada. They had a bunch of stuff that went on during the day. They had 40K, Star Wars Armada, Cards Against Humanity, Magic the Gathering, Yu-Gi-Oh!, free board games, tabletop, RPG, you name it. So if you are listening to us from the United States or if you're visiting Nevada at any point in time, head out to Fallon, check out Five Titans Games and Comics. You can find them on Facebook, and I'll make sure there's a link in the show notes. You can go and check them out and say hi to Josh for me, particularly if you're an Aussie and you head in there. Make sure you give him a little bit of hell. Really, really lovely people, and we appreciate their support from the other side of the world.
We do have to make sure that often people in America don't necessarily understand the Australian sense of humour.
That is true. It took him and his wife a little bit to understand some of the lingo and some of the phrases that I was using.
Oh, less that, more the
tone.
Yeah, more the tone.
Anyway, so yeah, if you do get a chance, and if you haven't already, head on to Five Titans Games and Comics onto their Facebook page and give them a like. So we really appreciate their support. The other one I want to quickly mention was a YouTube channel by Matthew Eric Brown. It looks like he's doubled his subscribers. I like to think we were part of that. If you haven't already, go and check it out, particularly if you're into narrative stuff, whether it's 40k, whether it's tabletop, whether it's RPG. The YouTube channel is called Matthew Eric Brown, and he's got like 70-something videos on there already. So the last one was actually posted at time of viewing 1 day ago, so that was the 2nd of Feb. And, you know, he's been regularly posting on this channel. So if you want to go and check out anything to do with narrative gaming, go and check out Matthew Eric Brown on YouTube. Again, there'll be a link in the show notes for you.
Both of those were unsponsored.
Yeah,
plugs
they're just stuff that I follow and we
we
look after. So, or we follow. So yeah, definitely worth going and checking out. I also saw there's a new Australian podcast that's been released on competitive 40k, which name escapes me at the moment. Done by Jeremy and Lee over in Victoria. And yeah, for the life of me, I can't remember the name of it. The Rubric 40k podcast, having just had a quick look at my likes and things on Facebook.
Yep.
They've only just come out with episode 1. I haven't listened to it yet because it's only shown up on my feeds this morning. So we'll probably have a listen, or I know I will have a listen. And yeah, maybe we'll chat to them in a future episode and do a bit of a cross one like we've done for some of the other podcasts. But in the meantime, if you feel like listening to some more competitive 40k stuff, you can check out the Rubric 40k podcast as well. I think that's everything now. I think I've covered all the stuff that I wanted to mention and chat about. You got anything?
I was thinking, if you don't already, then please check out our Patreon page. While we're advertising and promoting other people, let's advertise and promote us.
That's true.
Did you know we have a range of products as well? We have vinyl battlescapes, which have been on our boards at events for the last how many years now? 4?
A few now.
4 years. And most of them are holding up okay given the kind of travel they get. A few of them have got a few. Yeah,
there's a few scratches in them, but they've worn pretty well over the years.
Yeah, if you're only using them a couple of times at home, won't be an issue. We have that. You wrote a tournament tabletop prep guide,
which needs an update because it's a few years old now.
It is, however, still useful. I think it's for a low price of $5. So if you...
Or become a patron for a month and you get it for free and access to all the extra podcasts.
Which I was just going to lead into. If you haven't come to events or do come to events, this gives you some insight into thinking, I guess, how you can look at different things to think about before going to an event. If reading isn't for you, then we did do 10 episodes in the patrons only.
Yeah, it's like 11 hours or 12 hours worth of audio.
Yeah, listening to us talk about how to prep for tournaments. Plus also there's the little anecdote about the lizard. So feel free to head into the Patreon.
That's only a swear word in a small part of the world, so that's fine.
Lizard? It's not a swear word anyway. I was trying to move on there. So yeah, there's 11 episodes on that, plus also episodes looking at the difference between comparing ITC and ETC, and one that we're about to record that will be a surprise for everyone involved. So I'm still
stuck on 50p flights and the song.
All right, yeah. If you haven't heard so what Michael's referring to is a YouTube clip which is about Ryanair, which maybe he'll put a link in for because it makes me laugh every time I listen to it, which is quite often. What else do we do?
Related to travel for gaming.
It is, true. What else do we do on Patreon? Basically, it helps us afford to buy equipment
and pay for subscriptions to record and to pay for insurances to run events and all those other little things. And we did an update on some lapel mics recently with some of the money so that we can try and record remotely from away from the desk, which we haven't quite got that down yet, but we'll get there.
Yes, and so basically it helps us with stuff like that. So while there's content for you, it's also helping the community in general, really.
Yep, this podcast will stay free, but there is an additional one on the Patreon page for patrons.
Yep, and I'm sure you can put some links into all of those things that I just talked about. Because
you don't do it?
No, I don't. I would need to be writing this stuff down. We've got Facebook Live happening on Wednesday, which may be the same day that this goes out.
The 5th of February is the next one.
Wednesday the 5th. At the moment, that's going to stay on a Wednesday for at least the next couple of episodes. We've got, what else? Varsity's happening.
Yep. All the varsity dates are booked for the entire year. So if you head to the Objective Secured Facebook page and click events,
Beer Hammer's listed there.
all of the events, including the entire year's calendar of tournaments.
Needs to get onto our website, but hasn't yet.
I have been putting them there.
Ah, well done.
It's a time-consuming process.
I know. Normally I do it.
The next varsity is the 10th of February.
Fantastic.
So it's like, by the time you hear this, is about a week away.
A mixed gaming day is the 22nd of February.
Yep.
So there's a number of different events that are happening on that day. So have a look at that. Buy a ticket. We'd love to see you.
Mm-hmm.
We've got, as I said before, ITC First Blood Part 2 coming up in April. We've got also April, I think we're going down to...
No, March is Albany.
Oh, Interclub Championship.
Interclub, I'm hoping to get off the ground in April, Yep.
And then May, we're not doing anything because...
That's the lead up to show.
Yeah,
May and June is...
mad.
Blackout for events for us, at least.
Yeah. So come to one of our events.
Yeah, come and say hello.
Listen to us and give us some ideas around what you would like us to cover on the podcast.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we have to keep coming up with ideas. And we do like to be community driven.
Yeah, because
that
if you can tell
it better than we've run out of ideas.
Well, if people tell us what they want us to cover and talk about, then it makes it easier because we're giving people what they actually want to listen to.
Yeah.
So otherwise we take stuff that we hear in the community and explore what that means without any context from other people. So it'd be good if you want to tell us what you want to listen to. Anyway, I think that covers everything. I think we might be done.
Well, that was my moment of advertising. It's one of my goals for this year. We're good at promoting other people's
not so good at what we do.
Yeah, we tend to go, oh, look, let's create this, but not tell anyone about it because it'll feel like we're being pushy and salesy, and we don't like that, and it feels uncomfortable. So anyway, pushing through the discomfort and telling people about what we do.
Fair enough. On that note, we're done. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Like I said, post below in the comments on the Facebook page or on the website if you have any feedback from the topics and stuff we covered today. But otherwise, we're going to sign off now.
We are, whether we see you in person or online, and whether you play 40k or whatever other game you play. Happy gaming, everyone.
You've been listening to the Objective Secured podcast. If you'd like to get in touch, you can visit our website, objectivesecured.com.au. You can find us on Facebook, Facebook.com/Objective Secured, or you can email us, obsec@optusnet.com.au. Thanks for listening.